The negative space hypothesis. We are told that history is written by the victors, but I've come to believe something far stranger. I believe history is also sculpted by the void left behind by the defeated. You don't just erase a people by killing them. You erase them by removing the space they occupied. Think about your own home for a moment. The door frames, the ceiling height, the stairwell. These dimensions aren't random. They are a biography of the human body. We build our world in our own image. Now walk into any city hall, any old train station, any cathedral built before 1850. Stand in the doorway, look up at the ceiling, feel that strange nagging sense of excess. Why is the door 12 feet high? Why is the molding placed at a height no ladder can reach? We are told it is grandeur, aesthetics. I am no longer convinced. For the last 3 years, I have been collecting a specific kind of ghost. Not the ghost of a person, but the ghost of a scale. I started noticing them in the margins of old photographs, the sepia-toned kind, where the grain makes the past feel both more real and less certain. I was looking for architecture, the Tartarian buildings we've discussed in this series, but I kept finding something else in the frame. They were there, not as curiosities, not as circus performers. They were standing next to families, leaning on shovels at construction sites, sitting on horses with their boots dragging on the ground. Ordinary people, 7, 8, 9 feet tall, integrated into daily life as if being a giant was as mundane as having brown hair. And then, around 1850, they simply stop appearing, not a war, not a plague, a photographic silence. Today, we are not just asking where the giants went. We are asking a darker question. What if the mud flood wasn't just a geological event? What if it was a biological purge? And what if we are living inside the ruins of a world designed for bodies we are no longer allowed to remember? The ordinariness of the extraordinary, let me be precise, because the establishment will inevitably say, I am looking at forced perspective. That the tall man is just standing closer to the camera. We've all heard the debunking cliches, but look at the context. I have a photograph from Siberia, circa 1870. It is a work crew, 3 men standing beside a standard door frame. Except the door frame is 12 feet high. I know this because the building still stands. I measured the brick courses digitally against municipal records. 2 of the men reach the middle of the frame. The third man, wearing a tattered work coat, has to duck his head slightly to fit under the lintel. He is not smiling, he is not posing, he looks bored. It's a Tuesday for him. Another image, the American frontier, 1883. Railroad workers, 7 men in filthy clothes holding hammers. 3 of them tower over the other 4 by at least 3 feet. If these were genetic outliers, if they had gigantism, you would see the markers, the acromegalic jaw, the thickened brow, the swollen joints. You see none of that. These are proportional human beings, just scaled up. This is the detail that breaks the official narrative. You cannot have 3 people with benign, asymptomatic gigantism standing on the same work crew in the 1880s. Statistically, that is impossible. The only logical conclusion is that they were not anomalies. They were a demographic, and they were everywhere. Photographs from Russia, from Australia, from the American Midwest. The pattern is consistent. These tall individuals are never separated. They are never in cages. They are the foreman, the blacksmith, the farmer. They are normal, so why did we stop seeing them? The silence of the archive to understand the disappearance. You have to understand the silence. I spent 6 months digging through hospital ledgers from 1840 to 1890. Specifically, I looked at admission records for trauma. Broken bones, industrial accidents. The logic was simple. If a 9-foot-tall man falls off a roof, he breaks a specific type of bone. A femur that long is a statistical anomaly. In the 1840s, I found those anomalies. Records note unusually long limbs. Fracture of the tibia, length 24 inches. that is double the average. But by 1865, those entries vanish. It's not that the hospitals closed, the hospitals are still there. The clerks are still writing, but the language changes, the outliers disappear. The medical record begins to enforce a statistical average that did not exist 2 decades prior. Then look at the census. The 1850 U.S. Census has a notorious error. In several counties in Ohio, the average male height is listed as 6'8". Historians call it a typo, I call it a memory. By 1860, that averages back down to 5'8". The data was corrected. What happened in those 10 years? We have discussed the mud flood in this series. The global burying of first floors, the conversion of ground level windows into basement windows, the sediment that suddenly appeared in every major city simultaneously with no geological explanation. We assumed the mud flood buried cities, but what if it also buried the people who fit those cities? Think about the logistics of a 9-foot-tall human. A mud flood of 5 feet of sediment buries a normal man up to his chest. He can climb out, but a giant leaves on a different scale. If the ground rises by 5 feet, a giant loses his doorways, his infrastructure, the high ceilings, the large machinery is now at waist level. He is disoriented, trapped, and if the mud came at night, as the accounts suggest, they wouldn't have climbed out. They would have been entombed in their own beds. The guardians of the machine. This brings us to the most painful question. Why were they there in the first place? Let's revisit the Tartarian architecture. These buildings, the ones we now call Victorian or neoclassical or Beaux Arts, they are not just big. They are technologically specific. We see evidence of atmospheric electricity harvesting, copper spires that look like lightning rods, but are actually harmonic resonance collectors. We see massive sub-basements now buried that contain ventilation shafts and water purification systems. We see vaulted ceilings that are actually sound chambers for wireless communication. Who was supposed to pull the levers? A human being 5'8" cannot reach the primary junction box in the Philadelphia City Hall. It is 20 feet up a wall, with no ladder mechanism attached. It was never meant to have a ladder. It was meant to be reached by a hand that hangs at 8 feet off the ground. The giants were the operators. They were the guardians of the machine. They held the embodied knowledge of the old world. You don't write down a manual for a system that requires a 7-foot reach to reset the breaker. You just train your tall son to do it. When the mud flood hit, it wasn't just dirt that fell. The interface broke. The giants died or fled or were rounded up. And the infrastructure they maintained, the free energy, the clean water, the harmonic grids, it didn't decay. It was orphaned. Without the guardian, the building becomes a corpse. We look at the beautiful facades and think, what fine craftsmanship. We don't realize we are looking at a dead robot. A smartphone with no hands to swipe the screen. The erasure protocol here is where the evidence turns from sad to horrifying. The photographs that remain have been modified. I am not a conspiracy theorist, I am a visual analyst. I have tracked down original glass plate negatives, many in private collections in Eastern Europe, and compared them to the versions published in history books after 1900. In the original plates, the giants are there. In the published versions, they are cropped out, or the image is tilted to make the tall man look perspective, distorted. Or in the 20th century, they literally scratched the emulsion off the negative to remove the figure standing in the back row. This was not censorship. This was archaeological cleansing. Someone or some institution decided that the remnants of the guardian race could not be allowed to exist in the visual record. Why? Because if you admit the giants existed, you have to admit the technology was real. If the technology was real, you have to admit the mud flood was intentional. If the mud flood was intentional, you have to ask who survived it. The answer is us, the small people. The ones who lived on the upper floors, the ones who didn't need the resonance chambers, the ones who were easy to control. After the flood, the survivors emerged. The elites of the New World Order looked at the 9-foot tall bodies buried in the silt and made a decision. Not just to bury the bodies, but to shrink the narrative. They rebuilt the door frames at 7 feet. They wrote new medical textbooks defining normal height. They took photos of the remaining giants, the ones who survived the flood, and called them freaks. They turned the Guardians into a carnival act. And then, when those last giants died in the 1920s and 30s, the history books closed. The negative space, so here we are, walking through cities that don't fit us, sitting in train stations with ceilings high enough to fly kites in. We touch the marble walls and feel awe, but we don't feel grief. We should feel grief. We are looking at the architecture of a symbiotic partnership. Human and giant, builder and guardian, and one half of that partnership was erased. I don't think the giants were our masters. I don't think they were gods. I think they were our partners. They maintained the power grid while we farmed the land. They flipped the switches while we raised the children. And when they died, whether by mud, by bullet, or by neglect, we didn't just lose them. We lost the instructions to our own house. The most terrifying question isn't where did they go. The most terrifying question is, are we still doing this? Are we erasing a category of human being right now that the future will look back on and say, why are there no photographs of them after 2024? Are we in the middle of a reset? Is the mud falling now, just digitally? Are we deleting the guardians of our current age, the empaths, the antennae, the people who can see the grid, by medicating them, shaming them, making them invisible? Look at the margins of your own life. Look at the people who don't fit the statistical average, the ones who are too sensitive, too tall, too strange. They are vanishing from the mainstream frame. The switch is flipping again. And we won't notice until the lights go out and the ceilings are too high and there's nobody left who remembers how to turn the power back on. The giants are gone, the mud is dry, but the silence isn't empty. It's listening, and it's waiting for us to forget the rest. What else is hiding in the negative space of your memory? Share what you've seen before the algorithm adjusts the crop.